if we just stop again, you and I love the latter, don't we? And you started by saying trendiness. Steve, tell me about trendiness. And you talked about a few things you had seen. And don't all of us want to go back into the some form of the womb and be held again? Isn't that just a universal
Yeah.
thing? And then you talked about being swaddled in blankets. And then I talked about my own journey with, you know, years and years of doing 12-step groups, and how I, no disdain for them, no disparagement whatsoever, but how I just have matured in my own thinking. And then we came to the place where we talked about arrestation and being stopped. And I just thought about the fact that these are the natural progressions of life and learning and healing. These are the natural progressions, Doc, of life and learning and healing. All of us attempt things. All of us have moments where we need things. All of us have these experiences where that we seek after that which doesn't work eventually for us, but it might have worked momentarily. And so I think that the larger discussion for me is about the fact that the human spirit, Doc, the human spirit is then unquenchable. People say, why do you do what you do after all these years? Just yesterday, a guy I've known forever said, why do you still do this? I just looked at him and I thought, if he could see the clients that sit in front of us, Doc, and to to have the privilege to be able to see them at their sometimes their darkest and dankest moments of their lives, and they permit you and I entrance, and they welcome us into those very dark spaces you just talked about, and you and I help them move through that with intelligent and grit and swift thinking, and then bring them to the place of those aha moments that you just spoke about. That's power, Doc. Every single person has that need. I want to say one more thing, and that is that, Doc, this just doesn't have application for humans. It has application for organizations, doesn't it? It has application for churches, Doc. This, we don't want to get off on this, but my heart bleeds for the church right now. And if my heart bleeds for pastors who are stuck, who are out of money, out of ideas. And so I just send out this message to all of us that God is still God. God hasn't stopped being who he is. Because the culture shifts its opinion about who we are, how it thinks about us, it doesn't change who God is. And these ideas that we're going to plow into right now, Doc, have deep relevance and value, not just for me, but for humans that find themselves stuck and unprepared, or ill prepared, are unequipped or ill equipped to face whatever the fury is that's coming in their direction. How do you receive that, kind sir?
I I, I would concur wholeheartedly that God is with us and God is for us, not against us. And he is for that growth. And whether we like it or not, um, God has allowed in this world for hardship to be the thing that refines us. You used the word earlier, the crucible. I mean, that's a pretty biblical concept, often referred to. This idea that there are trials and temptations, there are hardships and sufferings, and they purify us. They don't destroy us necessarily, but they purify us. And they cause to emerge in us the best of who we can be. My concern, I think, linking back to my early thoughts in this conversation, is that when we are talking about trauma-informed care or some other trend like this, is that we're careful not to so insulate ourselves and lose balance. People hurt. We've said that, right? And just in this conversation, acknowledging the hurt, acknowledging the difficulty, acknowledging the tragedy of it. So I'm not advocating in any way that we kind of ignore that and just say, buck up, buddy. what I'm saying is that we can acknowledge those hardships, and we balance that with, this is not the end, and you need not run from this. Okay, you need not try to constantly avoid this, but you in fact heal and incorporate. You acknowledge, you heal, you incorporate. You acknowledge, you heal, you incorporate. That to me is a progression of dealing with hardship or trauma of all varieties, even some of the most egregious of traumatic experiences. You know, the kinds of things when they tell you the story, you just want to weep with them. How could that, or you think, you can't believe that a human being has to go through something like that. All of those, I think, can fall into the crucible of that, acknowledging it. You know, here's what really happened, and it was horrible. You know, but then being able to move to healing, so that you can actually continue to acknowledge it without the negative consequences and the negative reactions to it. And that doesn't make it better, all right? But you can stand with it. Some people use the phrase, they've made peace with it. All right? It's one thing to acknowledge it, but not make peace. You need to acknowledge it and make peace. You need to heal and realize you're not stuck because of that, but you actually can be better. And then integrating that experience into who they are in a manner that they control the good that comes out of it.
Acknowledge, heal, integration. Is that
Yeah.
the? You know, let's chat about that. That's power, Doc. And whenever something comes that I really like, I want to hover. You know, the old Steve would have pressed onto some material, but man, that's power. And so when a person, I'm tingling again, Doc, that means we're on story, we're on good. There's gold in this conversation. So acknowledge. The way I say that to a client, Doc, and to myself is I try to help them put words to that. Okay. My father put the words to it. And sometimes I'll give them a selection of words because they don't have the words, Doc. You've seen me do this, and I've seen you do this. I'll give them a collection of words, and no, not that one. And as we're throwing darts, trying to that's what he did. Okay, and then I make them say that, Doc. I want you to say that he did this, they did this, I had, bam. Man, that's acknowledgement to me. And then I love your healing piece. The healing piece for me, Doc, is, for me, it's always when I can. I'm going to take me out and make this third person. It is always when the client can speak about it in a third person observational place. That's for me how I begin to see that there is some growth. Oh my goodness! Well, that person, I make that a third person event for them, and for them to be able to see that and experience it, and again put language to it, and then integration. How has this impacted my life in past, current, and then what happens? We're not going to get into future me today. I don't want to do that because I'll stay there because that's my life. So I love healing. I love acknowledgement, healing, integration. How do you receive that pattern that we just talked through there?
I think that if you use that construct to think about the strategy of therapy or of any kind of healing art, acknowledgement, I would say, includes that ability to get into a third person perspective, even. That's part of acknowledgement. And we have wonderful resources. There's a ton of stuff about radical acceptance and some other key elements that are often found in dialectical behavioral therapy. And this idea of being able to observe and describe your circumstance. Emotional intelligence, creating vocabulary. One of the most powerful tools we have as human beings in order to self-regulate our emotions is language.
No doubt.
And so the power of language is part of that first phase of dealing with hardships and trauma. is really being able to acknowledge it. And not only that, but expanding beyond the obvious. So the pain of a negative experience will be the most obvious. They hurt me, or they hate me, or whatever that is. Okay. Um, but then there are a multitude of other things that are part of that process too, that have to be acknowledged. Where do they feel guilty? Where do they feel ashamed? Uh, Sometimes you have to keep advancing their vocabulary, and you need to start walking around this whole issue, because there are other things. What beliefs, if we dipped into cognitive behavioral therapy, what beliefs have taken as the core beliefs that are part of, so you're acknowledging even core beliefs. So acknowledging is a lot of work, and there's a lot of time invested in acknowledging what really happens. And that's hard for people, because honestly, they're like, I don't want to talk about it over and over and over again. And sometimes people are thinking, well, what's the purpose? And I think it's important for us as helpers, we better know the purpose. We better not just be talking about it to talk about it, and think that simply talking about it in itself is enough. There needs to be some purpose in our expanding acknowledgement while we talk. That does bleed into healing. But when I think about healing, I think about concepts of forgiveness, which should never be uh, uh, taken on too quickly. And as a believer in Jesus and the teachings of Christ that elevate forgiveness, sometimes I watch people want to just do it because they think it's a magic formula. It is not a magic formula. It is a work of transformation. When Christ forgives us and we receive that, there's a transformation. When we forgive our debtors, there's a transformation. So you need to take the time for that process. But that's part of the healing. Sometimes it's just where the breach is, and the kind of how we've been distorted, our view of ourself, or our view of the world, or our view of other people, or our view of relationships, our view of sex, our view of the sexes, has been distorted by our trauma. Healing is the correction of all those things. It's the putting back together all of these things that have been distorted because of hardship or pain. What an incredible amount of growth that is. I mean, you change. You are not the same person when you move through healing. And that second phase is powerful and cannot be skipped. You cannot just jump into integration without making some significant process in healing. And then the integration, that last phase, is all about how do these things become realities that actually empower you. I think of the hardships that I've experienced in my life and what it has afforded me. It affords me the capacity sometimes to sit in the presence of other people's hardships and not react, to interpret how they are responding differently, and say, okay, I can wait here. I can stay in this agony with you a little bit longer. People, when I worked at a substance abuse treatment, and we would be in, they would cuss me out, and it would be just this nasty old thing. They were just like, just letting loose verbally. And I could be there. I could be present with them still. Beyond that, and I think the analogy I use for that kind of experience is nurses get thrown up on, okay? But they just clean up and keep going. They don't run out, say, oh, I'm done with you because you threw up on me. They say, no, you're sick. And so I think that I've been able to incorporate some of that, and many people have that are in the healing professions, We can stay with people when they're flailing, and sometimes even offensive. And, we can be in that present moment because we've integrated our own negative experiences. We've healed and integrated. So, yeah, these three phases of treatment, they are where real change happens.
Trendiness, start there. We talk about how all of us have,
And seeking balance.
and seeking
Trendiness
balance.
is an attempt, I think, to try to integrate new things, but it should be leveraged to find balance, so we don't forget the old things that we know are good.
Yeah, yeah. It's really a good piece. Resetting baselines, resetting baselines. The piece that keeps coming back to me, Doc, is the greater work that we do. The greater work that we do is based on sessions. And we want people to keep reminding themselves that a session is necessary in their life. A session is time to sit, to think, to reflect, to reboot, to reconsider, to seek counsel, to seek higher levels of insight than you personally possess at that moment. I do that all the time, Doc.
Mm-hmm.
It's the opposite of arrogance. It is the opposite of puffiness. It is this act of human humility that you say, I need and seek out something of greater insight and value than I currently possess. And then allowing that to go on.
That I want to just highlight the word you said. It's humility. Session work ultimately is an exercise in humility. And when you humble yourself, this is the promise of God.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Doc.
He will exalt you.
And I'm a tennis player. I'm not an athlete. I'm a grinder. I'm a fighter. But I watch great athletes. I observe and marvel at the capacity to hit certain shots. I study the technique and the analytic of how they do that. Just the rhythmic motion. The point is, Doc, is that all of us get stuck. I get stuck. Okay, I'm not immune from any of this stuff. Okay, in the work you and I do, what I love, Doc, about the work, and I'm telling you this, I love that I get to talk to you when I'm stuck with a client, not as much as before, but how many times a week do I call you and say, Doc, I got this, I don't know how to deal with this. I've either seen it or not seen it. But I want everyone to value session work, which is allowing and permitting insight to re-enter your life. That's really what it is, Doc.
And that's how you progress through those three stages that I rambled about.
No, and I wanted to get to those because I want you to hammer those nails. I want you to give them again and give them so folk can see the progression that they need to move through in this particular pothole of their life. Doc, give that again.
So the first phase is acknowledgement. The second phase is then the healing. And then there's the integration. And we started off, one of our key tenets of Canopy is this idea of developmental. Things are developmental. And we can look at development in a couple of ways, two key ways. The first way is the way I just mentioned. There's a linear progression, okay, where you're moving from point A to point B to point C. And that's bringing transformation. You can see this in mental health. You see this in cognitive development. You see this in social development, this idea that you're moving forward. It's maturation, all right? In spiritual formation, you see it the same way. You learn something and you progress forward. Not that you don't ever return back again, but when you do return back again, you should be returning back again to old concepts at a higher level. So you're constantly moving progressively upward, almost like a spiral going up. So that's one concept of development. Another concept of development are things that you encounter that are distinctive to the lifespan. When we think about the first year of a child's life, there are certain elements that are learned in that stage. So the stages of development are another way of looking at development, that you have to navigate stages and that there are specifics about each of those stages, and that we all experience. And I think that's sometimes a concept about development that is getting lost in our trendiness and needs to be brought back into balance. Is like, what stage of development? Even you and I are in a stage of development in the lifespan. All right, it's one of the last stages, but we'll just say the latter stages. Okay, but what stage are you in, and making sure you're navigating not just trauma or bad things or good things, but what are the challenges that are distinct to the human growth in that particular stage. All our work we do with adolescents, we have adolescents that in Erickson's first and second stages, they just had some failure to successfully navigate. They still have to overcome those issues, but not at the expense of the stage that they are currently in. You have a 14-year-old that is in, Erickson's fourth stage of development, or they have to navigate that, even if they still did not navigate trust versus mistrust in stage one of the first year of life. They have to do all of them at the same time. So those are not kind of, I'm wandering through life, and these are the things that I happen to wander across. Like, what do I find in the woods? All of us, when we're in a certain stage, are navigating something specific. It's part of the human development. So that's another way. One is, how do we overcome the things we encounter? Hardship moving into growth, maturity. The other one is, how do we navigate characteristics of the stage of life that we're actually in? You and I are navigating, I think, being generative. Our emphasis and our how do we leave a legacy? How do we affect the generations beyond ourselves? I mean, it's where we are, and that is a common human experience. And so that's another way of seeing development, is through common stages of experience that need to be navigated and integrated. I just had another fleeting thought about the power of development, and sitting in a place and realizing this is a common experience that people are having in our first world experience. Our affluence, the enormous number of options that we have, just as human beings, tons of options, where we live, what colors we choose, what brands. I mean, we have options. We've become very, very aware of our individuality. What do I like? And you mix in some relativism, the philosophy of relativism, and unfortunately, we start to think that we don't have a common experience with other human beings. Oh, this is just my truth. It's my reality. And we divorce ourselves from the common human experience. And that is a dangerous place to be. To think that we are devoid of some of the common experiences of what it means to grow up as a human being. Individualization to the extreme of isolation and denial. Well, that's kind of a sobering, hard thought, isn't it?
It's a little difficult to swallow, but it's one of those moments where you just it causes you to pause and think. And so for me, I want to, grow the aperture now on the ideas that you've put out there. And so I always think about the human being that sits in front of us, or that is the constituent, if you will, that I'm seeking after and that I wish to speak to. And that person is always someone that has this characteristic, Doc. The principal characteristic is that they are broken. Life has done something that has either, I like your word immobilized that you used earlier,
Mhm.
or it has disabled them in some way, or it has disenfranchised them in some way, or they have been fragmented in some way. And so the one of the things I wish to do as we're hovering here again is to remind all of us, myself included, that these are parts of the common human experience, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I love what you just said a moment ago about the fact that we all think we're such individuals, when the truth is, when you put us in a larger polyglot, we all look pretty much the same from a 90,000-foot view, don't we?
Yeah.
And so,
And I think
it,
that has I think
what?
that has to be taken into consideration. When you say when someone sits in front of us, we're not just looking at their personal experience, we're
It's
looking
true.
at where they are developmentally.
100% true.
Where are they in the common experience of humanity? And so both of those have to be perspectives that we have.
Yeah. And, if you go backwards, Doc, in our conversation, and we go back to your acknowledgement phase, one of the acknowledgement pieces that I work hard at is to bring some normalization to that moment.
Mhm.
You know, it's pretty harsh that your dad made you. Had a client once who told me that his father made him sleep outside when he was being a bad child, however you want to view that. That's whatever he had done that had irked his father. And I said, well, people have been raised with wolves a long time. And I remember the response, and it was like, I said, no, it's been happening a long time, that parents have decided that if you're going to misbehave that way and tear holes in my walls and break windows and throw knives at me, you're going to stay outside for a while until you can decide not to do that. And I still recall the look on that client's face when I said that to him. But normalization, Doc, this is a part of the common human experience.
Mhm.
And for that person to come to the conclusion, and it works, in many, many ways, Doc. It doesn't just work in the kind of startling way. It also works in the comforting and relief way, doesn't it? Because then the client or the person is able to say, oh, here, I thought I was the only one. You want to talk into that? I think it's an important,
We
construct
are,
that I use an awful lot.
yes, we are not, you're not alone. Um, the individualization, the kind of myopic trend of Western culture, and I used to separate the two, but I think it's also alive and well in Eastern culture. Um, that makes you feel very lonely. Tragedy, hardship makes you feel. The result is you feel very lonely, feel very alone, and all that. And you're not alone. And that is a wonderful. When someone finally hears that and gets a taste of that, that's part of the healing process and the acknowledgement process is I am not alone, you know, and that begins to, and we started with balance. It begins to balance out the perspective of the breach. Because if you think you're the only one that has experienced that type of breach, the breach is much larger than it really is.
True.
When you realize that the breach stands alongside of many others that are breached, suddenly it gets a little bit smaller, a little bit more manageable, and you have a lot more hope.
And Doc, alongside that, I just have this idea that just hit me, that there are some times when you must be alone. Okay. And in the work that you and I do, again, it is has such relevance and such potency. Let's use that word, and efficacy, because there are times when I say to the client, you must detach from that. whatever that is, Doc. And so I think it's important for us to surround this conversation with some, prescriptions, some remedies about how we move a person in session work to this idea of stages of development. And session work is always the search for insight and the welcome of insight. And to me, those are just valuable, valuable things, Doc. And then as we start to plow deeply now into this idea of development, development has lots of aspects to it. Session work, we've talked about this acknowledgement, healing, integration. I love that flow, Doc. I'm going to keep that in my mind. But then as we continue to plow deep into these thoughts that are so important, especially in this culture that is so much quickened and fast paced, and people need to come to the place where that they see that their life has reason and purpose and value. So now we plow into this idea of development, Doc. And development has to do with, how do I do that? How do I get to, well, first of all, what is the why to why I do it? And then there are some what's to it, but how's it in days to come, Doc? I look forward to this because to me, there is literally nothing more exciting than watching discovery happen in my life and in the lives of those people that I get to serve.
Mm-hmm.
Discovery, Doc, is such a powerful thing. And when the crust starts to snap that's held them, and they start to, and it is an inching thing, Doc. It is a particle by particle thing. When they start to move into the capacity that they really possess, to me, there is nothing, Doc, more thrilling than to be a part of that. I mean that. What do you think?
It's why I do what I do. It's what I like. One of the things I value is wanting to make an impact. I want to be a man that makes an impact on the world.
Yeah.
And learning how God has gifted me and created me so that I can be that impact maker. And where do I do it? Some people build beautiful buildings or make great works of art or pieces of music or tell stories, and that's how they impact the world. You, and I think other like us, our impact is being the one that can administrate some healing and some growth and development. And when we see it, even in the smallest of ways, it lights us up. It lights us up. And in training people that are going to be helpers, I want to nurture that, that excitement. When you start to see the smallest of thing that is an ingredient to being whole and healthy and moving forward, when you see it, enjoy its presence.
And Doc, what I want to attach to that is expand the model again to churches. You and I are people that love God. Churches are stuck. Churches are struggling. Pastors are in real jeopardy in these moments, many of them. And we send out this light. I like your word there. We send out this light with the idea of them getting lit with the notion, the caption that can capture them and their congregations. These principles, Doc, these ideas, this model you have prescribed, acknowledgement, healing, integration, there's more to come on the other side of that. These can grow into church work, Doc. They can work into organizational work. And I think that in this hour, especially this hour of my life, if you would have told me that I would have lived long enough to see congregations at the level of risk that I notice now, Doc, I'd have said it's not possible. So I want to, as we kind of wind down this session, Doc, and next time we will plow deep into, I pray, the developmental principles that you and I have worked so hard to scratch out and then to flesh out in people's lives and our own lives. But I want you to speak into that, Doc, because I think there is a, if you will, a prophetic word that potentially we can speak to, especially to pastors and church workers that are, feeling completely constricted in these moments. How do you receive it? Do you think that's on topic or off topic?
I think that these things can be applied to organizations, and the people that those pastors and leaders, which we've both been pastors, so our heart is there. We've walked in those places. Um, I There is hope for them, and but the way may be challenging, and there it may involve a crucible, and but God is always faithful. I have a lot of thoughts in that, and I look forward to us being able to kind of explore them. That'll be a lot of fun. Um,
Perhaps
they
in a
aren't
session in the
going the way
future,
you
Doc,
think they will.
perhaps in a session in the future, we'll just hover there for an hour. What do you think
Yeah,
of that idea?
I think that's a good idea. It's an excellent idea. That would be a good conversation.
I think so too.
Well, it has been good to see you this morning.